The world 4.7 million years ago was raw and untamed, a place where survival was not a choice but a test written in the bones of every living creature. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wild vegetation. Volcanoes occasionally breathed fire into the skies, shaping mountains and valleys. Amid this chaos, our earliest ancestors, fragile yet fierce, took their first steps into the unknown, trying to understand a world that offered no mercy. Life was a constant balance between fear and discovery. They were not yet like us. Their minds were sparks waiting for fire, their bodies still built for the wilderness. Communication was a series of grunts and gestures, but within those sounds lay the beginnings of language. They lived in small groups, bound not by words but by instinct and shared struggle. Each sunrise brought both hope and danger, a reminder that survival was a privilege earned with every breath. Food was scarce, and every hunt could mean life or death. The forests were alive with predators, saber-toothed cats, giant hyenas, and reptiles that ruled the rivers. The early humans were neither the fastest nor the strongest, but they had something no other creature possessed: a growing awareness. They began to use stones not just for breaking nuts but for shaping tools. A cracked flint became a weapon, a defense, and later, a symbol of intelligence. In those small acts of creation, humanity took its first true steps toward dominance. Fire was still a mystery then. Lightning sometimes struck dry branches, igniting forests that burned for days. The prehistoric humans watched from afar, both terrified and mesmerized. They learned to keep their distance, yet deep within, the flame sparked curiosity. What if that power could be controlled? It would take thousands of years for them to learn, but the dream of fire had already been born in their eyes. Night was their greatest enemy. The darkness brought predators, cold, and fear. Without fire, they huddled together for warmth, wrapping themselves in animal hides and staying silent under the vast starlit sky. The moon became their silent guardian, a light that reminded them they were not completely alone. Every howl in the distance tested their courage, every rustle in the grass kept their hearts awake. Yet even in that fear, they learned resilience. Water was life, but it was never easy to find. They followed rivers and streams like lifelines, setting up temporary camps near their banks. The women gathered fruits and roots while men hunted with crude spears. Sometimes, they failed. Sometimes, they returned empty-handed. Hunger gnawed at their bodies, but they learned endurance. Their unity, holding together through storms, droughts, and losses, became the first true form of civilization. Death was a familiar presence. Many didn't survive long enough to see their children grow. Illnesses struck without warning, and there were no remedies beyond instinct and chance. Yet even death taught them something valuable: memory. When one of their own died, they began to mourn, to remember, to feel something deeper than instinct. The seeds of empathy were planted, the beginning of what would one day define humanity. Migration became their way of life. The changing seasons forced them to move constantly in search of food and shelter. Each journey was a story of survival, of crossing rivers and climbing unknown hills. They learned to read the skies and the ground, to follow the signs of nature. Every footprint they left behind became part of humanity's trail, a silent chronicle written on the earth itself. One fateful era brought great cold. The land hardened with frost, and food became scarce. Many tribes perished, but a few adapted. They learned to hunt larger animals, work together, and share warmth in caves. For the first time, they decorated cave walls with shapes and handprints, perhaps to speak to something beyond themselves. Art had been born, not just as decoration, but as a voice for their existence. By the end of this age, the line between beast and human began to blur. They stood taller, thought deeper, dreamed further. Fire, tools, and unity gave them control over their destiny. The struggle for survival had shaped them into something extraordinary. The world remained wild, but for the first time, it had met a creature capable of shaping it in return. Humanity had begun its long and unending journey. As generations passed, their minds sharpened like the tools they shaped. They began to understand patterns, the migration of animals, the change of seasons, the hidden meaning in the stars. Knowledge became their silent power. The elders of each tribe passed down wisdom through stories carved in mud and memory. These were not myths then, but lessons of survival, born from blood and experience. Each tale carried warnings, hope, and the courage to face tomorrow. They discovered that cooperation was stronger than strength. One hunter alone could not defeat a beast, but together, guided by signals and trust, they could bring down prey much larger than themselves. This unity was sacred. It meant survival. Around the carcass of a fallen mammoth, they shared not just meat, but a sense of belonging. For the first time, they began to see themselves not as individuals, but as part of something greater, a tribe, a family, a people. Curiosity became their greatest gift and their greatest risk. Some wandered too far into unknown lands, chasing rivers that led to deserts or mountains. Many never returned, but their courage expanded humanity's reach. The explorers were dreamers before dreams had names. They followed the call of discovery, and each new territory revealed new challenges, different animals, climates, and dangers. Through trial and loss, they learned adaptability, the true key to survival. Fire, once a distant wonder, finally came under their control. It was an accident. A branch caught flame during a storm, and one daring soul carried it back to the camp, feeding it with dry leaves. When warmth spread through the cave, fear turned to awe. They realized they could fight back the cold and the dark. Fire became their heart, a guardian spirit that transformed their nights into safety. Around it, they cooked, bonded, and found the beginnings of civilization. With fire came invention. They began to cook meat, making it softer, easier to chew and digest. This gave them strength and time to think, to plan, to dream. They discovered that heated stones could shape better tools, that smoke could drive away insects, that light could chase shadows even from the soul. Fire didn't just change their bodies, it transformed their minds. It made them creators, no longer at the mercy of nature but capable of bending it. Communication evolved from mere sounds into meaning. They pointed, gestured, and made tones that began to carry emotion, fear, joy, warning, affection. Words were being born in the echoes of their voices. Language gave them a new kind of strength, the ability to share ideas, to plan, to teach. Knowledge could now outlive its bearer. Through language, the human mind began to connect across generations, binding time itself. Hunting became strategy rather than chance. They learned to use traps, surround herds, and follow footprints. Observation turned into intelligence. They noticed how the wind carried scent, how birds scattered before predators, how seasons shifted the movement of prey. These instincts refined into understanding, a primitive science guided by experience. The world was no longer an enemy but a puzzle they could learn to solve. As survival became slightly easier, emotions deepened. They learned affection beyond instinct. Parents protected their young not just for survival, but from love. Mates grieved when one was lost. They began to form bonds that transcended utility. The human heart, still primitive, started to dream of connection, safety, and belonging. Empathy became a silent language, binding souls as tightly as survival once had bound bodies. Caves became homes and symbols of safety. Within their stone walls, they painted stories, the hunt, the storms, the births, and the dreams. With pigment made from ash and earth, they immortalized their lives on rock, hoping perhaps to be remembered. Those handprints, still found today, are the whispers of ancestors who wanted to say, "We were here. We fought. We survived." Art became humanity's first attempt to speak to eternity. Slowly, their journey led them from instinct to identity. They had mastered tools, tamed fire, and built families. The struggle that once threatened to destroy them had forged something unbreakable: the will to live, learn, and endure. From the forests to the plains, they carried forward the spark that would one day ignite civilization. Life 4.7 million years ago was brutal, but it was also beautiful, because it was the birth of us all. As centuries turned to millennia, the scattered tribes began to grow in number and strength. Their gatherings near rivers and valleys became more permanent. No longer did they wander endlessly. Some learned that staying in one place brought safety and abundance. They began to recognize the rhythm of the seasons, planting seeds near fertile soil without realizing they were inventing agriculture. The world was shifting, and humanity was beginning to shape the earth instead of merely surviving upon it. Their relationship with animals changed too. Once predators, they became companions. Wolves who lingered near human fires found warmth and scraps, and slowly, trust was born. In time, those wolves evolved into partners, early dogs that guarded the camps and joined in hunts. The bond between man and beast became sacred. It was not just survival anymore. It was companionship, loyalty, and the first spark of friendship that stretched beyond species. Weather shaped their lives as much as hunger did. When the skies darkened and rains flooded the plains, they built shelters from branches and hides. When ice swept across lands, they wrapped themselves in furs and huddled together. The human spirit proved unbreakable. Each storm was a test, but each one made them stronger. They learned to read the wind, to smell rain, to predict danger. Nature was their enemy, their teacher, and their God all at once. They began to notice the patterns of birth and death, of stars moving across the heavens. Curiosity turned into wonder. Why did the sun rise? Why did the moon change its face? They began to see meaning in the world around them, crafting the first seeds of spirituality. They believed in spirits that lived in trees, in rivers, in fire. Fear gave birth to reverence. From reverence grew faith, the first form of belief that life was more than flesh and bone. With new tools and understanding came greater ambition. Stone turned into weapon and weapon into craft. They shaped blades, carved handles, and made jewelry from bones and shells. What began as survival became expression. They adorned themselves not just for function, but for beauty, for the joy of being alive. The dawn of creativity marked a turning point. Humanity had stopped merely enduring life, they had begun to celebrate it. Conflicts arose when groups grew larger. Food, land, and pride led to tension. The first battles were not for conquest but for survival. Yet from conflict came lessons, organization, leadership, and the value of peace. Some tribes chose cooperation over war, trading goods and knowledge. These exchanges built connections that stretched across valleys and rivers. The world was vast, but now, humanity was connected by invisible threads of trade, trust, and story. Fires burned brighter, and languages grew richer. Around the flames, they shared tales of ancestors, hunts, and dreams. These stories preserved knowledge, passed down wisdom, and gave meaning to existence. They no longer lived only for the next hunt, they lived to be remembered. Memory became their immortality. The spoken word was the bridge between generations, and storytelling, the heartbeat of humanity, had begun. As generations passed, they mastered stone, then bone, then metal. Each discovery elevated their lives. They built better shelters, sharper tools, stronger bonds. The children of hunters became thinkers, and thinkers became builders. Humanity was no longer shaped by the world, it was shaping the world itself. They had crossed the threshold from survival to civilization, from instinct to intention. And yet, even as they advanced, something ancient remained within them, the same pulse that once beat beneath the starlit skies of prehistory. The fire they guarded was no longer just flame. It was knowledge, memory, and hope. It reminded them of their ancestors who faced beasts, storms, and hunger, so they could live to dream. The legacy of survival was written not just in bones, but in every heartbeat that carried humanity forward. So when we look back 4.7 million years, we are not just seeing the past, we are seeing the beginning of ourselves. Every tool, every fire, every story was a step toward the world we live in now. The prehistoric humans did not just survive, they built the foundation of what it means to be human. Their courage lit the first spark of civilization, and that flame still burns in us today.